I've got to say, I'm pretty excited about this online lecture, and I hope you are too, because we're going to be looking at the methodology of iconography. Out of all of the methodologies of art, I have to say that this one is my favorite because I find it so fascinating, and it's one that I use quite frequently in my own scholarship. Now, when we're defining this approach, this method, what we want to think about is this idea of symbolism. And essentially what that means is we're looking at the subject matter, we're looking at what's being represented, and we're approaching it from this standpoint that these images that are represented have the potential to communicate a symbolic meaning. Now, this is going to be a little bit more of a challenging methodology in some ways than formal analysis. With formal analysis, the other methodology we're working with, you don't really need to have a wider knowledge of the work of art. Really, all you need is a working understanding of how formal elements and design principles cooperate in order to create a work of art. And from this, you can craft a loose interpretation. Not the case with iconography. With iconography, there's two things you need to know. First of all, you need to know the tradition of symbolism throughout the history of art. And then you also need to reconcile that tradition within the context of the work. Now, you might be wondering, well, I'm new to art history. This is like the second lecture I've ever watched. How does one go about that? And don't you worry, I've got your back. I've got a great source for us to use that'll help us with the tradition of the symbolism, right? Essentially, what we do is we'll look it up. And then with context, you can do this on your own. It comes down to this great thing called research. So in this tutorial, I'm going to demonstrate how to conduct an iconographic analysis using this fantastic painting by the artist Bruegel the Elder. Now, first thing you want to do is you do want to get a sense of the subject matter in its entirety, right? Don't just launch into it. You want to spend some time with the work of art. And this is the same with formal analysis. My sort of pearl of wisdom is to take your phone, set it for 5 minutes. It's going to feel like 5 million years, but it's going to really force you to look carefully at the work of art. The details are important. They can be what, kind of makes or breaks it in terms of being accurate in your interpretation. Now, especially with this work of art, right? All you need to do is take a look for 5 seconds and you'll see that this is a really dense and complex work of art. There's a lot of things for us to look at. So first thing let's do is let's just kind of do a little survey of what we're seeing here. I've broken this piece up into 4 quadrants. We'll start with the upper left-hand corner. Okay, so what do we have going on here? Okay, here's a guy and he's shooting arrows. Here's people kissing under a broom. This guy's covering his face. People plugging their nose. Cards falling on the ground. Here's a guy with no pants on, riding on an animal. I don't know, a guy kissing a chicken? Okay, so far, pretty interesting stuff. Let's look at the lower left section. Here's again our guy kissing the chicken. Creepy monster guy being tied up by this lady. This guy's banging his head against the wall. The shearing of sheep and pigs. Yucky swamp with an animal in it. Ladies talking. Here's another creepy devil guy. Let's move on. Okay, this is the upper left quadrant. We have some butts sticking out, and it looks like people defecating in water. Someone here in the water, feet sticking up, some fishing situation happening here. And then down in the lower right quadrant, not sure what's going on here. Someone spilled something white. A guy throwing down flowers. This is interesting. A fake Jesus, right, with this clearly artificial beard, some animals fighting over a bone, some pigs, right? Now, we don't know anything about this work yet, right? So we're going to, kind of come in blind, because that's how most of the artwork you're going to be working with is going to be. You're not going to know what it is immediately. Now, I think that we can be kind of on the same page here and say that it seems like there's some shenanigans that are going on. So that might kind of help us to guide where we're going to go with our iconographical analysis, that there's shenanigans. So let's just start with that. Now it's time to conduct the iconographical analysis. This is where your 5 minutes on your phone comes in. So we've kind of looked around. Now we're going to look at the details, okay? So what we'll do, like for example here, is let's just note some things we see. Like, for example, we see a beard. So I write down beard. And I see flowers. So I wrote down flowers. What else did I write down? Like an eel. I'll write that down. Bare feet. I'll write that down. Anything over here? Sheep. Shearing sheep, we'll write that down. And then here, there's a moon, we'll write that down. It's like black cape situation, there's a broom. Okay, so we've got enough. Obviously, we could go on and on and on. There's many, many symbols. I'm going to limit this to just these few. So then, now that I have all my symbols, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go online to this source, the Online Symbolism Dictionary. And this is where I'm going to look up what these symbols mean. So the way it works is, so like for example, let's talk about scissors, right? Or shears, which there's in 3 spots, here, here, and then you can barely make it out. Shears, they're like cutting an eyeball, okay? So I would click on S, a list would come up. Now when I did this and I clicked on this list, there was not scissors and there was not shears. So I could be creative. What do shears and scissors do? They cut. So I clicked on C for cut, there was nothing. Okay, well, what other things cut? A knife cuts. So I looked up knife, knife is in there, and knife represents severance or sacrifice. So I write that down. Now, one of the things that's going to be complicated is that when you come across these definitions, they're going to be rather broad, and they're going to give you a few different meanings. And some of those meanings are going to be seemingly contradictory. It's your job to decide which meaning is best using subject matter as your evidence. This is why I encouraged you to first just take a look and get a general sense. So, for example, our general sense is there's some sort of shenanigans going on, right? So, if we go back, okay, here's some butts, and here's some guy, where is he, with no pants on, right? If you were to look up nudity, one of the things that it would say is it would say purity, right? Purity is one of them. A lack of morality is the other one. Based on what you see here, which is the one that's the most likely symbol? Probably not going to be purity, right? You're not going to be pure and innocent and not wear pants riding on an animal. And this, by the way, really sexually suggestive. So you want to be critical in your selection of subjects or of symbolism, right? So just kind of keep that in mind. So another one, for example, is I, right? E, I. So here's the I, okay? And there's one I. So when I looked up I saw that it represented moral conscience. I saw that it represented one I, divine omnipresence. Now it also, in Asian cultures, signifies a sign of respect. Now, this is a 16th century Dutch painting. I don't think anything Asian is going to be factoring in to this message. So that would be kind of an opportunity to set aside that possible symbol. Probably not something that Bruegel was aware of, that particular Asian symbolism. Some other things that I saw, I looked up broom, couldn't find it. That's okay. There's so many other symbols. I'll just look for something else. So black, I looked up black, and I'm pointing this out because color can be a symbol. You can use color as a symbol. Now, technically, black is not a color. It's achromatic, but I will sleep perfectly fine in my bed tonight if you want to say black's a color. I'll go there. So black, that represented violence, it represented death, it represented mourning. So I'm going to note that. Another thing I looked up was this moon here, crescent moon. Now the crescent moon also had multiple meanings. The phases of the moon represent man's condition on earth. Also, the middle ground between the light of sun and darkness of night. Now, if it's crescent, it represents youth and adolescence, but if it's waning, and I can't tell if it's a crescent or waning, I'm not a moon expert. If it's waning, it represents decline of life, sleep, and decay. All right, what else do we have? We have, this is interesting. Did you notice this? There's like a barefoot, there's a shoe, right? So I looked up foot, and it said that the foot can be phallic, and that the shoe can be kind of a reference to female genitalia, right? So maybe another kind of like subtle sexual innuendo happening here. I'm not quite sure. I looked up eel, nothing in there. I looked up fish, and fish represent Jesus. This is a shark, actually, that's like eating fish. Sharks, I looked up, that represents Jesus. And actually here, there's a fish as well. So I'm getting the sense that this is some sort of shenanigans that are kind of being reconciled within some sort of religious message. And this, I think, can be supported by our fake Jesus that we have right here. And his beard represents wisdom. Now, because the beard's fake, you can kind of argue an inverse and say, okay, it's a lack of wisdom. And then let's see what else. This here, this fire, what do you think of when you think of fire, when you think of religion, particularly Christian religion? I don't know about you, but I'm thinking about hell. And then we have the flowers. Now, I looked at these, and these to me look like poppies. So I looked up poppies, and they represent also female genitalia. So again, like maybe a sexual reference. Then I learned that scattered flowers, I also looked at flowers, because poppy wasn't in there. Scattered flowers represent joy and like the transitory, the ephemeral, the temporary. So maybe like the temporary nature of pleasure. Like for example, like sexy time, right? That's like a temporary pleasure, and it's kind of something that seems to be repeatedly alluded to, these kind of like sexual innuendos in this piece. All right, so I've got this like loose idea based off of these symbols, and now I bring it all together, right? What does this mean? So we've got these shenanigans, we've got some religious references. So to me, my interpretation is that it seems like this image is a sort of moralizing image of a warning. That the one eye right here, that indicates divine omniscience. That I take that as God is watching. Now, if we're looking at the one eye as moral conscious, the fact that you've got these open shears, these scissors, which cut, and cutting represents severance, shows this kind of disconnect, a lack of moral conscience, right? There's immoral things that are going on here. Now, with the moon here, right? To me, it represents the earthly realm, that middle ground between the light of the sun, which we could say is heaven, and darkness of night, which we could say is hell. So we have man's condition here on earth, which the phases of the moon represent, right? The middle ground, earth. And I actually am going to say that it's a waning moon, and that the waning represents decline of life, sleep, and decay, right? That idea of dying. And is there anything symbolically that could support my thoughts about symbolism regarding dying? The cloak, right? So this idea that, how do you pass the years of your life? You want to choose wisely, because you've got judgment, at the time of your death. And, the sheep, the shearing of the sheep, sheep represent innocence, which sheep were not in the online symbolism dictionary, but lamb was. Lambs represent innocence. If the shearing of the lamb is this representation of sin, right? Maybe then you can talk about that's what kind of would make you a false Christian, that you're not truly being a Christian, you're not truly living Christian principles if you're willingly engaging in these sort of sinful actions. Now, with all of this interpretation that I'm making, I'm basing off of symbolism I looked up in the online symbolism dictionary. One of the things I did not do, you'll notice, is I didn't make up my own symbolism. That is not a thing in art history. You're not allowed to make up your own symbolism. You have to look it up, okay? So please do not fall into that trap. Don't give in to that temptation, speaking of sinning, and make up your own symbols. You have to look them up. You can't make them up on your own. Now, once we have this loose interpretation, this is where we kind of go in and we reconcile what we've seen symbolically with the context, okay? So Bruegel the Elder, from further research, I learned that he specialized in making these sort of rustic images of peasant life in the Low Countries, right? This is Belgium, Netherlands, French Flanders. In 1559, this locates us in the Northern Renaissance. Now, the Northern Renaissance, this is a time of religiosity. It is a time of moralizing. We are seeing the production of Christian art. So certainly that intent does go in line with what was happening at the time. Now, what else was happening at the time in 1559? Well, in 1517, we have Martin Luther, kind of in the neighborhood of this region, posting his 95 Theses on the church doors, calling out the church. And what this does is it ushers in the Reformation. 1559, which isn't that much farther after 1517, you have Protestantism as well as another sect to Christianity, Lutheranism, that is spreading. It's a time really that can be characterized as one of spiritual turmoil, uncertainty, conflict. And this does spill out into the realms of politics that tries to mediate what's happening in this religious realm. All of these, this turmoil, Bruegel does, he's aware of. He seemingly internalizes it. It's something that he's seemingly upset by. He seems to be kind of reflecting that sense of turmoil and perhaps, concerned about the sort of religious progression of things with these competing religious sects, and is warning people against perhaps following false prophets or turning away from religion, because it is a time of uncertainty. That pretty much, I say, would encompass an iconographical analysis. Now, we can do even further research if we wanted to, and I do, and actually think about this idea of Netherlandish proverbs. It turns out that these are depictions of actual proverbs that were used to encourage correct and moral behavior. So, for example, to stick out a broom, that means to have fun while the master's away, right? So this idea that God's up in heaven doing his God stuff, he's not here. People think they can just do whatever, right? So again, kind of the idea of divine omniscience, right? God's watching. Don't just have fun, that there's consequences. Also, the broom refers to this proverb of marry under the broomstick, which means to live together unmarried, which is like super sin to the maximum, right? Another one, okay, 1 foot shod, the other bare. Balance is key, right? Moderation. To me, this might be maybe a reference to the sin of gluttony. And this I keep coming back to. This one is to tie a flaxen beard to Christ, which is to hide deceit under a veneer of Christian piety. Pig stabbed through the belly, which is right in here. What is done cannot be undone. The choices that you make in this life on earth, you will be held accountable for the next life. And then this one, cast roses before swine, to waste effort on the unworthy. This is the only one where I was really incorrect with my iconographical analysis. They're not poppies, they're roses. So I went back and looked up roses. Red roses represent blood shed from Jesus on the cross. Some are red, some are white. This is kind of a weaker, probably incorrect analysis. But a lot of the other proverbs do reinforce this interpretation of making the right choices in this life, ones that align with Christian principles, to make sure that the fate that awaits you in the afterlife is the ideal one. Now, if you're interested further in this, I have a link that I've included in Canvas in the same content area that you access this lecture, that will take you to an interactive image of this painting. And you can actually click on the various scenes here, and it will tell you about the different proverbs. And you'll see that the proverbs, that they all relate to things like vanity, greed, laziness, gossip, dishonesty, stupidity, adultery, right? So again, once again, reaffirming this interpretation of a more moralizing image.